So without further ado, we have a very good panel this afternoon. So it will be a very nice time for you guys to learn more about like electric vehicle, how they get charged, the energy infrastructure, what are the challenges and trends and solutions. So here with me, we have Sven Thesen, who is our moderator, and he has been working in 20 years as a EV consultant and currently a founder of project greenhome.org. And then we also have Collier, co-founder of Key Simpson, which is also the same meaning of sense of earth. And then we have Josh Eichman, senior research engineer at NREL, and we have David Sawaya, director in the clean transportation from PG&E. And we also have Paul Stith, director in the strategy and the innovation from Black & Veatch. So please join me to give them a round of applause, and I'll pass over to Sven for the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. The way we're going to do this is each of our presenters is going to have one slide to go over what they see as the most important factor in EV charging right now and in the future. So we start with, I believe, Clay.
Thank you. So I'll talk about a few things we did first. We did the V2G project for the Department of Defense at the LA Air Force Base, which is the first at-scale use of electric vehicles as an aggregated battery to balance the grid in the ISO market. What that means is we scheduled, assigned, and tracked 30 to 40 buses, cars, and trucks that were all electric vehicles or hybrids that could do bi-directional charge and discharge. And so at nighttime, when I'm not having those vehicles driven, I'm synchronizing the batteries to an ISO signal every 4 seconds. 4-second balancing market. So I go plus 100 kW, minus 30 kW. Very cool project. It developed the entire spectrum of vehicle control, charge automation, and there was no profit available in it. None, zero. Because what happens is you're dependent on the ISO market and the cost of participating. But we developed a technology that was critical to smart charging of vehicles. The next project I'll talk about is Alameda County. We'll have some folks where we took both private vehicles with 20 charge point chargers upstairs and a fleet of vehicles downstairs, and we flattened the demand charge. So we eliminated the peaks that cost you half your electricity bill so that you don't accrue a nasty fee in charging. Third one is we worked with Proterra and VTA. You got an introduction today to VTA. And what you're dealing with there is these 400 kilowatt hour bus batteries. So if you get 5, 10, 20, 30 of those, it's a lot of load. And you're doing those at anywhere from 250 to 350K. That's a lot of peaks, and it could cost, the buses are $1 million. You save on fuel, you save on operations, you save on maintenance, but you can't eat the electricity cost of careless charging. So we do smart charging with VTA and ChargePoint there. And then we did a microgrid where we take a photovoltaic canopy, combine it with Second Life batteries, and we can flatten out DC fast charging anywhere that you slap that microgrid. All right, so having developed that core, what do we look at? What do we care about when I say what's going to affect the market? Number one is awareness. Do people understand the benefits of an electric vehicle? Do people understand the value to themselves, how fun it is to drive one of these? Do they understand the social benefit of it? A lot of technologies, the technology was sitting there for 10 years. Car navigation was 10 years. ATMs were 15 years before awareness says, man, everyone should have one. What a wonderful thing it would be. And then after awareness, let's say range anxiety. The knowledge that I can keep a car charged, there's sufficient charging, there's sufficient management of charging, I can algorithmically solve that problem. So I would say that's one of the things we wrestle with a little bit to make sure that the process of car charging is addressable, and that we can convince buyers, go ahead and buy. And then the third thing, grid integration. You know, we've proven the technology, but now we have to get utilities, and we'll hear from PG&E. We have to get the utilities, the operators, the vehicle fleet owners to participate in economic models that make sense, so that you do what we do with smart charging. You flip the equation and make charging an asset to the grid. All right, that's it.
Well done. Paul?
I just want to make sure I'm doing like Clay, I'm cheating. Okay, so I'm going to catch up with it. So Paul Stith at Black and Beach. Paul Stith at Black and Beach. So we're a really large organization, about 103 years old. A couple weeks ago, I said we were coming out of stealth mode because people don't really realize behind the scenes for these large tasks that humanity wants to accomplish, whether it be in water, whether it be in power or in communications. There are large companies in the behind the scenes that are doing the work that we do to enable these things to move forward a little bit faster. So I'm a director of strategy and innovation for our Transformative Technologies group. In that group, we focus on transportation, the infrastructure on the energy side, as well as communications. We're doing battery energy storage, and we're doing a lot of things that ties back into the communities and the utilities, of course, our colleagues here, on the, that can make it go forward faster. There are a lot of great technologies in the lab, but when you want to take them out into the built environment, certain things start to happen. So I kind of identified a few things that I thought were important. If you go out here, say from the money, right? How do you look at, from a utility and a high power infrastructure way, to find the funding to keep up with the obligation to serve? So if you're a utility, you have these long programs of planning for addressing acute power needs and long-term growth and getting power where it needs to be. So if you look at it from a wires and a non-wire, so just exactly what Clay was talking about is a non-wire solution could be local to something where you act upon energy in an intelligent way in order to not have to construct very expensive wires. Those wires require additional right-of-way, you need to cross the community with things that don't exist, and that takes time and frankly money. So you need to plan for these things and look at those approaches. From a specific, and that's a long holistic process. It takes 5 to 10 years longer if you look at the kind of planning horizons. If you look at specific projects can have challenges. Those could be anything as simple as, well, maybe it doesn't have power, maybe it actually is not constructible, maybe it was a parking lot put over sand and nobody knew it until you go to construct something. So as these facilities start to be larger, you need to understand the environment that you're working with. Encountering unknown and unmarked utilities that might be gas lines. For example, in the middle of a project, over the top of a tunnel in Manhattan will stop the project. So specific things, understanding and working with and through, whether it be power, constructability, and an awful lot of engineering to get these things solved. The third thing that I wanted to look at, again, from the customer side of where you want to go in terms of electrification is, if you're a fleet, transit, logistics supplier, taxi fleet, or autonomous fleet coming to market, you actually start with zero and zero power infrastructure. And you have goals and benchmarks and milestones. So how do you get from point A to B? So we're working with transit agencies to look at those types of things. We're looking with fleets, and it starts with power accessibility. It also looks at what is the ability to construct, what is the traffic availability, a lot of impacts. So how do you get the power, the communications, and the land use issues identified and put onto a roadmap so that you actually get where you're trying to go? You can actually realize if you take 10 or 12 or more agencies in transit, they'd like to all be 100%. And California's probably going to have legislation towards that soon. How do you get there? You get right there.
Thank you, Paul. Josh?
Thanks. So my name is Josh Eichman. I'm at the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. For those who aren't familiar with this, it's one of the national lab that's across the U.S., the Department of Energy's national lab system. We're almost 100% focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy. That's our kind of niche. So the idea today is to talk about some kind of challenges and then potential innovation, areas for innovation and impact. So had highlighted a couple here. I think there's a lot of overlap, and I agree with everything that I've seen on the panel so far, and there's plenty more to talk about. So what I want to do is kind of highlight a few things that the lab, NREL, and DOE find as their priorities moving forward, as areas that they think they can really make an impact. So the first one is kind of understanding infrastructure needs in appropriate locations. The real idea behind that is the intersection between infrastructure and behavior. We know if you add more charging stations, range anxiety goes down, but that costs money. So understanding from an engineering point of view where those need to be, how do they support the network. You can see an image up there that shows the study that we finished recently that looked at infrastructure across the country to supply, to make sure that the majority of the country would have access to electric charging. And these are the kind of things that I think are really challenging for a city to do, but something that would fall into the realm of these large organizations. And people like Tesla has their network, and EVgo and Electrify America are really doing a lot of work, but there's still a lot of understanding to do, particularly in the behavioral area, to understand, if I'm switching from, right now everyone's, this single unit dwelling going to these multi-unit dwellings, and we're really seeing moving from early adopters and these fast followers to the new users is really going to change the charging needs that you have and the infrastructure that's required to do that. So I think we really need to take a hard look at that area, and it provides some really nice opportunities moving forward. So I mentioned one with multi-unit dwellings, but also TNCs, so like your ride-hailing, ride-share type applications, where if those were electric, their use patterns are going to be very, very much different. And Collier is going to be able to deal with it, but it's something that from an infrastructure point of view, we need to come in ahead of time and say, okay, this is what our priorities are, and this is how we can achieve it in this kind of new environment. And then the second one, at the risk of taking any thunder from David from PG&E, I'll talk a little bit about rates and early market utilization. So we find this as being like a really important area, causing a lot of problems now, but can really open up opportunities for you in the future. So we know there's a lot of different rate types. We know a lot of people are saying, oh, these demand charges are killing us at our DC fast charge stations, our level 2 workplace charging, and public charging. And we also know that, and some may not be aware, there are already rates with no demand charges. So it's just about finding the right place and the right fit. And there's more utilities now that are testing out these no demand charge rates. But is that the solution? So when we're looking at it in early market, where you have a few cars per day coming to your station, it looks like you really need no demand charge. But as the utilization goes up, we're finding that it's actually cheaper to use the rates with demand charges. So there needs to be this transition period, and Southern California Edison is pushing a rate through that looks at delaying the demand charges. That might be a nice option. So there's a lot of things I think we need to look at there. A lot of sort of runway for us to improve. And then the last one I want to talk about is very high power charging. So that's another area that DOE is very interested in, and NREL is moving into. So now, there's home charging level 1, level 2, and this DC fast, and maybe 50, 60 kilowatts, maybe up to 240. We're looking at 10-minute charging and 350 to 400 kilowatts. Is the technology there? I bet someone will try to sell you something, but I think there's still a long way to go in terms of improving that. And to get to a 10-minute charge means that you're kind of it's the equivalent of a gasoline vehicle. You spend a few more extra minutes and that's it, and to top off your vehicle. But of course, the trade-off is the grid impact. So now we got this 10-minute charge. It sounds great, but what does that do to the grid, and how can we manage that? So again, make Clay's job harder, but I'm sure they'll find a way to help reduce those demand charges, or whatever they may be. So this is the kind of environment that we're working in. And at the risk of taking any more time from this great panel, I'll stop there.
David?
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here to talk a little bit about what we're doing at PG&E and where we see some real challenges going forward. So up on the slide, the first thing I'll talk about is the picture up on the top right for you all. So PG&E has a number of large infrastructure programs that we're either rolling out or will be rolling out soon to try to increase access to to charging and really accelerate adoption of electric vehicles across the state of California, or mostly in Northern California. But this is actually one of the first sites we've built. This is actually at the far southern end of our service area near Tejon, which is just before the Grapevine as you go over to LA. This is one of the first dozen sites of 750 sites. We're going to be level 2 sites we're going to be putting in across Northern California in the next 3 years. And then about 3.5 hours ago, we received final approval from the California Public Utilities Commission for 2 large infrastructure programs, one for about $24 million over 5 years to focus on DC fast charging, and the other for about $230 million over 5 years to focus on non-light duty electric vehicles. So that was after quite a long regulatory process. That was quite a good achievement today for PG&E and more broadly for the state of California, because similarly large programs for the other investor-owned utilities in California were also approved. Rates have already been mentioned. That's obviously a very important role of the utility. We currently have electric vehicle rates for our residential customers that if you're charging your vehicle overnight and you have relatively average usage, we come out at the equivalent of about $1.30 a gallon. So that's quite attractive for people in California where gasoline prices are very high. But you know, a lot of the other panelists have already brought up the issue of utilization and demand charges. So we're currently developing commercial electric vehicle rates, which we're hoping will address some of those issues, especially in the early years. And then last thing I'll point to, not to try to be exhaustive about all of our activities, but on the bottom right here, it doesn't show up very well on the slide here, but we're the operator of the distribution grid, and so we're trying to help customers who are developing DC fast charging, any charging really, but you know, obviously as you get up into the higher power charging, that becomes more challenging from a distribution perspective. So we're trying to help people locate the installations in areas where our grid has capacity. So this is a snapshot of a publicly available tool for DC fast charger installation in PG&E's area. It shows the 300 priority 1 mile radius bubbles in Northern California and identifies specific sites in there that have grid capacity to help developers try to pick sites that will let us install them and get them up and running more quickly. In terms of challenges, the one that I see, and again, the step taken by the Public Utilities Commission to allow 5-year large-scale programs, I think was a really positive step in the right direction. But overall, we're still in a really early point of the market. We need sustained funding. We need certainty of the market so that utilities are investing, so that third parties are investing in infrastructure, so that auto manufacturers are investing in manufacturing. That's really critical in the non-light duty sectors where vehicle production has lagged behind the light duty vehicles. And we'll see what happens in Sacramento this year, but the governor's budget is an 8-year funding plan for electric vehicles, and that I think would be a really positive step. This has already been mentioned. Infrastructure is a fixed asset, and the technology is moving pretty quickly, so we need to try to be a little bit more adaptable in what we're installing so that it adapts to technology as we go forward. Not installing the base capacity that you need potentially, but like if we're putting in fast charging installations, building that out to 150 kW capacity rather than 50 kW capacity so that we can make sure we're evolving with technology trends. Utilization, I won't touch on that. That's already been brought up. I think Josh hit the nail on the head. Demand charges are a challenge at low utilization. They become much less so at higher utilization. So that's, I think, really where we need to be focusing our efforts, is making sure that the infrastructure we're putting in the ground is being utilized. And then Paul touched on this. This is infrastructure. It's not software. So this is actual construction. It takes time. It takes permits. It takes adjusting your design when you run into unexpected barriers, and that's just a challenge that we have to deal with.
All those in the room who have either leased or owned an EV or do currently to raise their hand just to take a quick look. Okay, so for all the people that don't, keep your hands up. Now your job as EV ambassadors is to find someone who doesn't hand their hand up and say, hey, this is a great vehicle or it sucks. Your choice as to which one you tell them that it does. Okay, just take 10 seconds to do that. It's great. Okay, it's great. Clay is great. Then next is part of that.
Wait a minute. I want to see the panel.
So on an average, exactly. So on an average, I think on an average, because Paul has had 4, you've got 2 currently, you've had a total of 6, and I've had 4, so that's 10. So the panel average EV per person is 2 per person up here.
Yeah, but it's all concentrated to 2 people. I mean, come on.
We're working on it.
So I'll defend my lack of an EV by saying I drove here in an electric vehicle because PG&E has the largest electric vehicle fleet in the country. So I borrowed a car from work and I drove down here. But part of the reason I'm pushing for DC fast charging is for exactly that reason. I live in the city, I park on the street, I don't have a garage. It's really difficult to own an electric vehicle today if you're in that situation. And deploying more DC fast charging, making it's not just about range anxiety; it's about access to charging for people who don't live in single-family homes.
Here. Second of all, there's a survey on the Hoover site. So if you open up your Hoover app with a nice little sky blue app, and on the front page, on the lower left-hand side, there's a button that says surveys. And there's a EV survey. Take about 30 seconds for the EV, for everyone to take that survey sometime during the conference, and I will take that information and incorporate it into my work and pass it on to the CEC. So that you're actually doing a service in guiding the California Energy Commission into what sort of infrastructure we need, what is missing. So as part of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about barriers as well. And to me, this was great. We have more than, I think, 50% EV drivers here, but there's still, I would call them a whole bunch of EV myths. There's a lot of myths out there in reality. In David's case, I think it's definitely reality, but the issue of range anxiety, the issue of how much the EVs are more expensive than gasoline cars, and then there's the lack of choice in terms of vehicle. We don't have pickup trucks yet. We don't have real minivans, for example, although we do have a plug-in hybrid one, but no pickup trucks. And both the perception and the reality of a lack of public charging. And the question is, how much of that public charging do you really need? And then, to me, the next one is the lack of love for level 1 charging. Level 1 charging is a plain ordinary outlet. So if I could get Paul and I could get our cars through the doors, there's ample charging here. It's just at 4 miles per hour. But if you're commuting and only driving 32 miles, you plug it in when you get home. David, how much impact does that have on the grid?
That's pretty easy for us to manage.
Okay. How about 1 million of us?
Still probably pretty easy.
Okay, so level 1 charging. And how expensive was it for me to install that level 1 outlet? Exactly. So it's underloved. And this is this perception of this myth that you need to install a fancy pants charger in your home, which you may choose to do so. And then the next one is what I'm going to call integrated DC fast charging. How many people here have Teslas? I got to boast, we got it last March, it's used, $32,000, banged up all the hell. But for the Tesla drivers, the ones that go long distance know that when you type in Tahoe, it's going to tell you where and when you need to stop for how long, and it takes all the sort of risk/range anxiety about knowing what you are and what you're not going to do. And if you go a different route, it will restart that route to tell you where to charge and how long you're going to need to charge. That type of integration between the vehicle and the charging systems really addresses long-distance range anxiety. Currently, the other long-range cars, like the Chevy Bolt with a B, does not have that, nor do we have the fast chargers. So Tesla chargers 300 miles per hour. A current 50 kilowatt charger is only 150 miles per hour. Where are you going to spend longer time? Then the next question is, dang, and this is a question for the panel, do we really care? Because if we're going to have, and this is going to pass on to you, Josh, as our resident Alex, Stefan, or Tony Seba, do we really care about spending a lot of money on infrastructure if we're going to have the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world with autonomous self-driving electric cars. That's what I'm going to leave you guys with. Has everyone got the survey open?
We have no service in here.
Oh, no service here. Okay. So that answers that question. So no driving autonomous cars in here? Okay. So my first question is for David, and I'm going to bring it back to David's slide. What happens when a lot of us start charging? A better question for the panel, for the audience. How would you rather spend 50 cents, would you like your cost of vehicle to be on the order of 11 cents per mile, this is for your electric car, or 3 cents per mile? Which would you like to pay? So for every mile you drive your electric car, you throw 11 cents out the window or 3 cents out the window? 3. Okay, so what's going to happen, David, when everybody starts to, because we can all program our electric cars to charge when we want them to. So when we learn about our time of use rates, what happens to the spike at 11 o'clock here?
So this is definitely something we've already started looking at. The load curve in California, I'm sure everyone here is aware of the duck curve. So our peak load is shifting from midday to 4 to 9 p.m. Roughly, and our rates are being shifted to correspond to that. We have super off-peak areas around 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. for about 4 months of the year. We can have negative pricing, so we're really trying to design our rates to encourage charging during that period of time. I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of things. When you're talking about the nighttime, is that going to always be off-peak or not off-peak? That's a little hard to say, but currently it's definitely a time of grid use that's much lower than other times. So for the near term, I think having people charge overnight is going to remain very attractive from a mobility perspective.
I'm not worried about the long, I'm more worried about the spike. When you tell us to charge at 11 o'clock, are we good people and we want to get that 3 cents per mile, right? So when PG&E tells us 11 o'clock, who's going to start charging at 11 o'clock?
I am.
We all are. So there's going to be this spike for about half an hour, while those who don't need a lot of electricity taper off.
Yeah.
So that individual spike. Has anyone else on the panel got an answer?
So on most cars, you can also do a when you're going to leave schedule, and your car will back up and calculate when it starts to do charging. So because I know this is a spike question, I've always got our cars programmed to charge only when they need to start, and it's randomized based on how much energy you need.
Paul is a good EV driver. He is good to the utility.
So now, we did a study for another utility in California, and we found that if you don't do smart charging, based on time of use and specific times and happen to be a warm area, they may need to replace actually about 17% of their transformers because of that peak. So it had 100 and some million, but with large numbers. So what, and I'm sure that's part of the thinking that's going on, is how do you randomize it? Is it left, right on the street? Is it by block? Is it by vehicle? And clearly also by control rather than behavior in the calendar and the clock. So there's a lot of smart people working on it, which is good news.
And I would just add, when we look at these rates, the utility rate doesn't reflect what the grid needs. It reflects roughly what the grid needs. So the whole idea of step changes has never been accurate. And I don't know what the solution is, but I know that there's a disconnect between the ability to make real-time rates, using residential LMPs or something like that, and the challenge from the CPUC, and what the grid needs. So, it is a problem. I feel like there's, 1,000 people in Silicon Valley that can create a charger that'll, just shift everyone 15 minutes around. So there's a solution somewhere. I don't know if anyone who's done it yet. So it is, but the bigger problem is I don't think those rates really reflect it, and I don't know the best way to do that. If the right incentive came out, then people would charge differently. I think everyone would save $1. Everyone wants a 3 cent amount. So again, I don't know what that looks like. I know we've talked about some more complex rates, and then you get pushback because the people it might impact negatively. But anyways, I think that's another issue where it'd be nice to harmonize some of these things and not every 5 years just change the rates to reflect your current mix.
And because you made a statement about hardware and software, I'll say software is the answer. So one of the things we do is we pick a threshold. If you have a collection of cars, vehicles, buses, trucks, whatever it is, pick a threshold, and I can maintain that threshold by cycling cross-charge based on a variety of things. But if you do it algorithmically, it's automatic. It's transparent to the user. Imagine if gas pumps were constrained and you had to have 8 people in a gas station taking turns squeezing the handle. It ain't gonna scale. So the answer is software cycling can handle a lot of that in terms of creating a power factor that's very linear. And then, of course, Josh makes some really good points about there's a complexity to what you do with tariffs, demand charges, et cetera, and PG&E will figure that out for us, I'm sure. But the answer in the long term is, as many things as you can solve algorithmically and make transparent to the user, you should. Go software.
Just to kind of revisit that, I mean, what I'm hearing from the panel and what I would agree with is, yes, it's an issue, but it's an issue with a number of potential solutions. If I'm looking at the 3 or 4 things I want my company to be focusing on in the near term to get people in the vehicles at scale, that's not the first one I'm worried about. Not saying it's not an issue and not saying it's not something we need to keep our eye on, but I've just heard 2, 3, 4, 5 potential solutions that you can pilot out over the next 3 to 5 years, see which one economically works the best, and implement.
So this one is for city managers and sustainability directors. I'm, along with David, we're pushing a vision of fast chargers over level 2. In that historically we've had what are called commuter or compliance EVs with ranges of sub 100 miles, and now we're moving, as you can tell by sales, the Chevy Bolt with a B was the biggest EV seller last year with the exception of Tesla's. The next one down was the Prius plug-in. The point being that people want EVs that essentially have ranges equivalent to gasoline cars. So as part of that, I want to impress upon city managers and sustainability directors a sort of costs associated with building level 2 versus DC fast charging. So Paul, what would you say is the median price to install one level 2 charger versus a, say, 50 kilowatt DC charger? And how many cars can you process, EVs can you process through both, roughly in a day?
And you want the answer today as well.
So they do. They start with the median price.
So, and I'll be very careful not to say specifics because everything is always different, right? You want to look at it, how does it scale? Well, the way we look at things is they're not just like, give me a charger here. We're looking at hundreds or thousands of them in a program.
Median price.
So in a level 2 environment, we can look at something, in the $7,000 to $10,000, $15,000, all told, one charger. But put 2.
One charger or one port?
See, exactly. So if you're in an installation, what I was going to start with to answer the question is if you can amortize the project management, the PMO, everything that's needed to get one charger in the ground, and amortize that across 50 or 100 chargers. And if you go to utility reports, which PG&E will follow theirs, SCE and others, is the average cost per port they're publishing is something around $11,000. Okay, but the sites that have more ports, the cost goes down dramatically. So when we look at a program like that, and whether in DC fast charging, by the way, a site, whether it's going to have 480 flowing through it or 240 or 208, to us a wire is a wire, a conduit's conduit. Your overhead and your PMO and your design, and project management, things that you need to do to get it permitted, could be very similar for a high-powered DC fast charger versus a level 2 in the same parking lot. And so if you're looking for bang for the buck, first off, be doing it in mass, because you're going to amortize that across multiple sites, repeating the program. And then also if you're putting it into a particular location that happens to be a junction and a lot of nice reasons to want to be there, you'll put out a lot more power, a lot more energy in DC fast. And so you're going to, if you want to go to the cost per watt hour, you can knock it out of the park with DC fast, and not just one, multiple. So we're building corridors, like 600, and Tesla's a client of ours, so we've done about 600 of those sites. So we know what it takes, and so if you want to get more bang for the buck, I think you answer could be that for the community members.
You hear that, sustainability managers? DC fast charging over level 2. Level 2 is great when we needed it, but we no longer have there's far fewer commuter/compliance EVs, and that's not the vehicle that people are driving as part of it. Clay. Batteries, and this is all the panel as well. Are we going to ever see the sort of the story whenever someone asks me, what do you do with those used EV batteries? And I say, second life of EV batteries and repurpose them. But is the price of batteries dropping so quickly that we're just going to use Virgin and the whole vehicle to grid type integration from using power out of the batteries, not really worth it because the stationary batteries are going to be so cheap?
So if you take a look at that, let's go to the top of the scale first. Bus batteries. There's a great article last week in the press, can't say who wrote it, saying, these 400 kilowatt, 500 kilowatt hour batteries, big batteries. A utility can buy those batteries. He can buy 8 batteries for a school bus fleet. Say, okay, I own the battery, I'm gonna lease it to you per month or per mile at a certain rate that guarantees you get economic driving. I remove a third of the cost of the bus. The vehicle manufacturer warranty is going to kick in at like 85%. So that's a lot of battery power, that's a lot of battery juice, a lot of battery left, and now he owns it. So all of a sudden he has 4 megawatt hours of batteries that he can put into balancing and storage and managing his dump curve. That's an interesting model. And by the way, people like SNT and Volta IQ refurbish these. So you can take it from 85% back up above 95%. So for the foreseeable future, this is going to come in waves. For the foreseeable future, yes, second life batteries have a purpose. We're extending that project I told you about at the LA Air Force Base. We're removing the batteries from the Nissan Leafs and stacking them as a second life battery resource, putting in new batteries, and using both sets to both trade in the market and balance building load, which is something else interesting utilities. So, given that we need balancing, we need to store energy because we're generating wind and solar in a non-predictable periodic fashion, yes, in the foreseeable future, second life batteries have the value.
I would agree very strongly with that. I think it's going to be a long time before new batteries are so cheap you would just throw away an 80% useful battery. BMW and PG&E worked together on a project here in Silicon Valley to prove out the use of second life i3 batteries for demand response. That worked really well. BMW is also, and I think this is an interesting model for all the auto manufacturers. Auto manufacturers have to have parts for their cars available for, I believe it's 16 years after they release the model for spare parts. And that includes, when you buy an EV, that includes the battery. So those batteries just sit around waiting for a car to have a problem. BMW stacked those batteries that are going to be sitting around, presumably, for 16 years or so, into a gigantic stack, and they participate in grid services. So, there's a lot of economic value when you start scaling up storage to that size. Currently, I think the economics of batteries simply for that are a little bit challenging, but if they're coming out of another higher value use like transportation and being repurposed to that, I think there's a lot of potential there.
So the interesting, the first generation of that project was working at my prior company. We did that with the mini e-batteries in a Mountain View facility. Personal project and a lot of sweat and tears into getting that thing up on the grid. The challenge is about form factor, standardization, and repurpose logistics. So if you have early batteries in a test pilot of 600 mini E's that were built, they're not very consumable as a standardized thing. Nissan Leaf, in terms of theirs, they've done a really good job of having modules that are ready to go. So you do need to look at the logistics. What does it take to sort out the batteries to find the ones that modules that are bad? And then what's the cost to transport them and reintegrate them into a safe system? A lot of cost. Buses, bigger vehicles, bigger batteries, more potential out of a little bit less logistics. So I think that kind of might lead some of the way. And you also may have more real estate to put them if you're a larger fleet. So we are seeing that in transit, for example.
where do you think we're going to top out in terms of DC fast charging? So Porsche's announced 350 kilowatt, and Tesla's said it is mere pittance in terms of what they can do. So what do we think it's going to top out at? And then on the EV drivers, how many people regularly use DC fast charging as their means to charge their EV?
More as a complement.
I know, hold on. You regularly use it as a primary, or if you can't do, if they're doing just local driving, or no, of their driving, what is the majority of it DC fast charging?
Nobody.
Okay. How many people use it when they want to go long distance? How many people want to go long distance? Or want and can? So, okay. So in a way, this tells us we don't actually need it. But we do if we want to go long distances. We desperately need it if we want to go long distances.
No, but
We're wrong
this
sample.
is skewed. No.
Yeah.
Because the people who have the EV chargers and EVs right now are in residential areas. To David's point, if you live in the city, you can't charge, you don't have a parking, so you don't buy an EV. So the customer base right now is different than the future customer base. Right?
Yeah, it's skewed,
Yeah.
it's
Sorry.
skewed, and the batteries are changing.
Yes.
And so I've been coming to this conference, it's in Palo Alto, so since 2011. And we had Leafs in the other days, and we were, gasping for charge when we got there. And if you were ever at SAP, there was like 6 or 8 chargers, and everybody was juggling their vehicles and so forth. I pulled in this morning to the garage, Chevy Bolt, we're over in Scotts Valley to here. I have 200 miles of range left in my car. And I can drive to Marin and back and have 30, 40 miles left. So the dynamics are different, but the skew of this is that you're not sampling people who are going to use DC fast as a primary means of fueling. Because those people are not out there yet, they don't have that confidence that we were talking about developing. So they can go from an apartment with full charge a couple times a week.
I'd also point out that probably the most impactful electric vehicle you could put on the road is a rideshare vehicle.
Right.
And Maven and GM are currently running about 100 Volt EVs in San Francisco on Uber with Uber and Lyft. And they've participated very actively in the Public Utility Commission proceeding that I was mentioning earlier, and they put through testimony which pointed out that by far the largest barrier to them putting more bolts into the ride-sharing fleet was access to DC fast charging.
Right.
Because even the drivers who have access to charging at home, they need a charge during the day to do their full duty cycle. And someone who's driving for a profession can't sit around for 4 hours waiting for the car to drive. They're perfectly happy to wait for 30 minutes because they need a break, they need to go to the bathroom, get a drink, do those kind of things. But you can't ask somebody to take 4 hours off in the middle of the day. It's not possible.
I just realized we've only got 15 minutes left. Can we open it up to the audience, please? Yes, sir.
Mark Bauhaus with Paired Power. I want to ask a big picture question. A lot of these are growing pains that have to do with going from 0 to 10% of cars being EVs, and within 5 or 10 years, at least in California, we'll be looking at sort of half the cars and maybe looking toward 100% or something close to that of being EVs. So what happens to the grid, and what's the right mix of these different types of charging locations and charger types when you get to 50% of the fleet? So like, some of the calculations that I've seen are that the grid capacity would have to double or triple from today when we get to that level of scale of EV adoption. So what are we going to look like? So the question is, in 5 or 10 years, when we get to 50% and more of the fleet, what's different about this discussion?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, no, Jamie.
Well, I appreciate the optimism. I don't think we're going to get to 50% of the fleet in 5 or 10 years. That would represent like 15 million cars in California. I think that's probably a little ambitious to take into account vehicle turnover. However, I really appreciate the optimism.
We're about 7 or 8% for most.
In Silicon Valley in January, we're like 12% of all new car sales, right? But statewide, we were more at like 5-6%. And when you take into account the preference of people for SUVs and trucks in non-urban areas especially, I just think it's going to be a little bit longer than that. But
Indulge 50% and up, what does it look like?
So, currently at penetration levels we're seeing currently, we don't really have any major challenges with the grid. We have clearly have local distribution grid upgrades when we put in high power charging in local areas. The VTA project that was raised earlier, those things require local distribution upgrades. That's a construction and a logistical challenge. Certainly when we start getting up into really high penetration levels, it starts impacting us at a generation level. And thinking about how much generation do we actually have to procure in order to meet demand. That's part of the reason in California that we're pushing EVs for transportation, because we've done an incredible job in California decarbonizing the electric sector. I think we'll kind of cross that bridge when it comes to it, but I'm pretty convinced that we've been doing this for 100 years and satisfying electric demand. Sometimes there's moments when we have to invest more in order to make it happen, but I see us meeting that challenge.
And then he asked the question earlier, the Tony Seba vision thing. At what point are we going to get out of this single occupancy vehicle disaster that we're trying to live through? You can't fix the problems without multiple passenger solutions. Whether, go VTA. VTA is going to electrify the buses. We should all ride the buses. They're going to have autonomous loop vans. We should have, the Tony Seba statement is all cars will be electric. They'll all be photovoltaic generated. They'll all be shared. They'll all be autonomous. Then you get rid of the parking. You get rid of 75% of the traffic. Life gets better. So again, it's going to be waves, right? So we're going to do second life batteries, and we're going to do various models. But when does the wave that you're worried about be overcome by the better wave, which is a different model of vehicle?
The follow-up question to that would be then what happens to gasoline prices if the fleet is at 50%, because you have a larger supply of gasoline now, which would be lower, right?
Did you say carbon tax? We'll talk about
So we're looking at 2030,
yeah, and I think the sponsor of our panel is BP. So I think there'll be a lot of societal changes coming up, and I think, and this will usually go right to the rabbit hole of road taxes and other things. So there are many things that are going to need to look at in terms of the economy, in terms of scaling it towards an electrified future. I'm as optimistic as David. I mean, we will figure it out. We figured it out for light rail. We figured it out for the subways. We do a tremendous amount of work in data centers. Those are 100 megawatt type facilities, and we put them in the middle of nowhere. Okay, we're talking about being closer to cities and taking advantage of what infrastructure is there. And to my first point, holistic solutions about planning towards wires and non-wired solutions. So, and all the tools are coming together. So I think that we're all pretty confident it's going to be fun.
Question here. I've had my EV for about 3 years, and in addition to gas savings, I've had about my maintenance bill has been $2.64 for windshield wiper fluid replacement. I think the maintenance savings, these things are underreported and are significant. So I'm just trying to, as part of a promotion for EVs, I just want to get an idea of the users here. What would be a reasonable average user yearly maintenance savings that you could add into the gas savings that you could sort of promote to people? What would be a reasonable figure? Just anybody, $200-300, $500, something like that? Is that too much?
Well, I mean, off the cuff, I'm not sure. Maybe you know better, but I know that a lot of that work's done to look at the the cost of driving for all these different vehicles, and it builds in that information. So it's out there. I think it's just a matter of finding it.
And the number I always hear, and I don't know what the absolute number is, but it's about 15% savings on maintenance costs for the vehicle over time, because you still have to change tires, which is the biggest expense, right? But all of that, I think, just to reiterate my earlier point, all of that points to ride sharing being the best application for electric vehicles, because I talk with Uber drivers and Lyft drivers every time I get in the car. They drive 60 to 80,000 miles a year, and some of them have to change their oil every 10 days. So if you're driving for a living and you have to go every 10 days to change your oil, can you imagine how much time that is for you? The economics of electric are undeniable. They get incredibly attractive when you're using that vehicle more than a passenger car.
That's high utilization, but also look at like fleets, VTA and others. They're going to experience 60 to 70% of savings. They're not going to be replacing at midlife diesel engines twice, perhaps, and they're going to not be replacing brakes. Big differences there.
I have a question about the built environment and land use. The very high question that has to do with the city conversation we've been having. What does the city look like, a dense city like San Francisco, with, let's maybe skip autonomous right now, but just look at the kind of charging infrastructure perspective. Are you having on-street charging? Are you having shared facilities where there's maintenance, where there's charging, where there's some storage that formerly are parking garages today? What does the city look like? And I'm concerned about this question because we're not putting them on. We don't put charging on the street generally, and maybe that's a good thing because the street should be for people, bikes, transit, and loading. But at the same time, where we have it now is almost entirely in private garages, lots, and then very, very few in public garages. So if you could just comment on that.
So David, I'll take a shot and I want your opinion on this. So there was a comment this morning by Arup that they got rid of, 8,000 parking spots? 4,000?
4,000.
I always exaggerate. Software thing. But anyway, they lost 4,000 parking spots to optimize, the commuter mechanism. Okay, now look at the shared vehicle. Even if it's not autonomous, right? It's a shared vehicle. I free up those parking spots and I put photovoltaic canopies and storage, and I have microgrids that facilitate PG&E not having to change the, PG&E can operate these microgrids, but I have microgrids that facilitate common charging facilities, and they're convenient, they're accessible, and remember, I'm getting rid of a lot of traffic as well as parking. That, what does that do to you?
Well, again, I actually don't know if you don't go autonomous that the city looks that different personally, because I think I would love to see someone pilot out curbside charging at a scale that let me see what the economics look like, because it strikes me that if you're going to take a street and you're going to rip the entire street up to put chargers all up and down the street, that's an expensive construction project, and the utilization of those chargers is going to be fairly low because people park there and they sit there. The gas station model, as much as we hate as EV advocates to compare to gasoline, it makes a lot of sense from a utilization and economic standpoint, because like Paul said, building 8 or 10 chargers at one location really decreases your per charger construction cost, and the utilization of them goes up because they're shared in a place where people don't just park and sit there. When you get to autonomous, I think it starts looking really different, because you have companies that manage huge fleets of them, and so they're probably more capable of manipulating them and managing them at a really local level, and program. The logistics of it just become a little bit more controllable than when you have people drivers. But I'm just not convinced that it's that different.
I'm just going to take a crack at it as well. Is that what an ideal outcome, by the way, is that more and more transportation converge so that it's more multimodal. So where you have high power use for the subway, for light rail, for these high power charging facilities, finding convenient places to build these things rather than stretch them out might be a model that emerges based on the capital intensity of it and not stretching it across every street. So London is trying that right now. There's just a lot of things about curbside charging in the world. North America has chosen to use a cord from our charger to the vehicle, and it stays with the charger. In London, the cord snaps into the light post. It's a much better user safety experience.
I'd like to say not finally on this question, is that to give you guys a gift, just particularly the non-EV drivers, to download an app called PlugShare. So when anyone asks you, or you're worried about how much EV infrastructure is there present, this tells you. And if you have a home and you're willing to let your charger be used at your home, you can register on this site. and people put pictures and they tell you. So as of today, the charger downtown San Jose in this parking garage, there's 4 of them. They're not in the basement, nor are they on the 3rd floor, but they're on the 2nd floor, and the LED light is out. That's to the level of feedback people put into this app. And so it's called PlugShare.com. And it's funny when you mentioned San Francisco, I pulled up San Francisco because again, living in Palo Alto, commuting a lot to San Francisco, I love the Whole Foods fast charger. Okay, I go there before my meeting or after my meeting, and I'm in there for 10 minutes to do grocery shopping for the family and simultaneously to get more than enough juice to get me home. And this is in my 80-mile commuter EV, and I won't be doing that grocery shopping with my long-range EV because I'll just charge at home. So if you're living in, again, David doesn't have, I'm assuming, doesn't have any sort of garage because he's parking on street, but for those people that actually just have a garage in a multi-unit dwelling, if you have access just to 110 power, that will get you through 90% of your Monday through Friday driving. And then there's not enough. Thank you, David. I'm looking forward to those large numbers of fast chargers coming in, but a much larger number. And as someone who has a residential a charger in front of their house, I get about 3 or 4 EVs that come by and charge in front of my house every day. I don't want that in all neighborhoods. I don't want these curbside chargers. It's visually, and you talk to too many people.
Not you, Sven.
One more question.
A comment and a question. I think one of the things I'm taking away from this, and something I've thought about for a while, is that range anxiety. It's really not about the actual number of miles. It's actually how long it takes you to recoup those miles, right? Because gas cars have limited range too, and just ask anybody who passes that sign on the road that says next gas, 150 miles, whether they have range anxiety or not. So that's an argument for DC fast charging. And to that point, building on the earlier discussion about peaks, I'd love to get the panel's thoughts on pairing stationary storage with charging, the faster or otherwise.
Yahoo!
Yeah, we're all
that's a go.
Yeah, we're all. Yeah, I think we all see it, and we're all for it.
Yeah, we did that at the we won the ESA Innovation Award for doing the microgrid, where you're generating photovoltaic with a canopy, and parking lots are perfect places for canopies. You're also saving the heat factor on the cars, so you don't have to crank the air conditioner as much. And then you're storing it in a battery. It could be a Second Life battery, it could be a 1 megawatt hour flow battery for a Google campus scale deployment. But absolutely, it gives you the ability to control the power factor that the grid sees, and makes life better, period.
And I'm going to push back here a little bit, because we've done some studies to look at putting batteries with every utility rate in the whole US. And there's only a small fraction, 10, 15%, where you want to do that economically for the cost today. So the challenge is, when you put in 20 plugs, what is a battery going to do? It's not even going to be one of those plugs, especially at the powers we're looking at. So is it a good idea? Is it going to help you balance some loads? Yes. Is it going to become economically competitive? Probably not. The best idea is to co-locate. Put it with a warehouse or a grocery store or something else. And then the next one may be batteries, a combination of batteries and solar. Again, solar doesn't always do what you need, but if you can find that co-location, it's great. And then if you're out in the middle of a connector station somewhere, okay, maybe you have to put some batteries, but it's a cost issue. It's a tough sell to me.
If I might, I'll jump in. So the theme of this was high power. So one of those chargers is as much power as all of Whole Foods in the future. So 350, 400 kilowatts. So and we've done a bunch of paired storage with charging across the country in supercharger type sites. We're looking at it in transit. We're looking at resilience for microgrids and buses, all this great stuff. But you need to look at it on another basis, and that's actually constructability and grid availability for a site. You can advance the calendar by multiple years for a site if, he's nodding, this is good, multiple years can be advanced in a project timeline if you couple it with storage, if the grid happens to not have enough power where you're going. And then you can do something really cool, which is you can sell back the services 24/7 to friendly utilities and grid operators that are looking for that type of support in the market. So you take your capital investment and you put some exponential gains into it when you're just trying to do EV charging. Really cool stuff.
The only thing I would add to that is we talked a little bit about rate design and demand charges and things like that. And you know, if you want to make storage economic, don't ask me to remove demand charges, because then the economics of batteries go away, and you can't have it both ways. You can't ask me to get rid of demand charges, but then pay you for all the battery storage and the services that it provides. So just pointing out that there are competing interests here, depending on which technology you're looking at.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. It's been a great set of questions, great panelists. I'm going to get in trouble if we continue further. Thank you so much.